Hi guys, welcome back. So you asked me for some more entry-level options on the channel. This is the first part of the puzzle. This is a Vector Optics Sentinel X. This scope has a 10 to 40 magnification range, a 50mm objective, and it has a specific reticle in here designed primarily for 25-yard Benchrest disciplines.
Right then guys, so I've been using it now I've done 5 sessions with it, a couple on the 22LR up at the club. It's a beautiful old rifle actually, that one, that 22LR. That's an 1807, so it's a mid-80s model. It's the same age as me roughly. Absolutely beautiful. Unfortunately, it's looking a little bit tatty nowadays, but I think what we might try and do is sweet talk the boys at some point, see if we can at least give that stock a refurb, because it shoots beautifully. Really nice bit of kit. That's what I put this on to start with, and I've also done a good few sessions now with it on the Benchrest 9015. First impressions actually pretty good. It's definitely a budget optic. It's under 200 quid. In most cases you can pick these up for say 170 to 180 quid. I actually paid that for it. I paid retail price for it. The place I bought it from actually swapped, or in fact gave us another set of dovetail rings with it. I think that's just for everyone. Everyone gets a set of dovetail rings, because strangely in the box it comes with a set of Picatinny rings. Now, for most people in Europe and the UK, I can't speak for the rest of the world, are likely to be using rifles that have got dovetail mounts on. A lot of the older 22LR rifles are dovetail mounts. What are the most common rifles using Benchrest? We've got things like HFT 500s, Anschutzes, Steyrs, all that sort of stuff. They all come with dovetails. So it's a bit of an unusual choice. Actually, I didn't realise, but when I looked at these the other day, these are the same mounts, although these have actually got a little laser engraved or etched logo of Vector on them. These are the same mounts that I use on the Catram with the little CP scope in. Not a bad little mount, just a budget mount, but they are sort of fairly true. But I don't think the majority of you are going to be using those. Bit of a weird choice to put those in. So yeah, this one actually came with a set of dovetail mounts, just a budget mount to get you going, I guess, really, than anything. I guess there's been a lot of people that were like, what mounts do I need? So they chuck them in. Anyhow, I paid for it, bought and paid for by me, so we can say what we like about it, but I do actually think it's quite a cool looking scope. It's got a nice finish on here, sort of fairly minor branding on here. Vector Optics on one side, Sentinel on the other. Got a fairly nice little blue logo in there. Everything feels pretty good. I like the knurling on the old mag ring. I like the knurling there on the turrets. Interesting with this one, a lot of scopes nowadays, this flare out to the objective bell here seems to be getting further and further back towards the midsection, towards the turret saddle. This has still got about a good 2.5 inches here of sort of space for your mounts, which means that you shouldn't really have any issues, be it on a 22LR or the majority of sort of typical air rifles. You should be able to get that on there fairly well. So overall, not a bad looking little package. Bit strange that it comes with Picatinny mounts. It should definitely really come with some dovetail mounts. Ideally, if you're looking at one of these, I would probably recommend that you actually look at some adjustable mounts. We've got 50 MOA of adjustment internally in the actual scope itself, which is 25 MOA up, 25 MOA down. And I did find that pushing this out to the further ranges, I actually had a little go with this out at 50 meters. I was fully maxed out on my elevation. I'm going to get to that in a little bit. It also comes with some flip up scope covers. Not too bad. They're the sort of rubbery type that just push on. Would have been nice if they went fully flat, because of course once that's on there, if it's open, sort of obscures your field of view a little bit, but overall not too bad. Little Torx Allen key if you like there, so you can slacken off the screw here to reset your turrets if you want to. It obviously comes in a box, no one cares about that. COM25 reticle, we can talk about that in a minute. It's a specific fine target dot type reticle with a few extra hash marks for aligning it on the target. Now it is a very fine reticle in this, which could be a bit of a blessing and a curse depending on your eyesight. But if we look at the actual scope itself, this is the ocular adjustment on the back. This is what you would adjust to your eye diopter if you like. Basically you make the reticle crystal clear for your eyesight. You can see I've wound it out a small amount already. Now there's no appreciable play in that. Now it's wound out a little bit. It feels pretty smooth. It actually feels pretty good. It doesn't feel graunchy or anything like that. Mag ring, do like the old knurling on here. Looks very Night Force-esque if you like. Feels pretty good. The mag adjustment, it's got a decent bit of friction on there. Not overly tight, not too slack, but it feels pretty good. There is a small amount of backlash though in that mechanism, which to be honest is to be expected for a scope of this price. The turrets, actually I quite like the turrets on this. Again, got the same knurling as the mag ring on the back there. They're a push-pull type turret, so to make an adjustment, you lift them up, make your clicks. The clicks actually sound pretty good. They feel quite tactile, feel pretty nice, and then once you've got the setting that you want, you push them back down. Now, having used this now for 4 or 5 sessions, it doesn't quite track as nicely as I'm used to. Now, of course, I'm quite lucky. I've been using some reasonably good quality scopes. I get to use a lot of different scopes. The tracking on this particular one is very much of the price point of the scope. So we're going to again talk about that in a little while. 50mm objective up front, fairly typical of this sort of scope size. It will let in a reasonable amount of light, but of course as the magnification goes up, you will find that the light gathering, especially indoors, it does darken off a little bit. Side focus on here, side focus feels really nice and smooth. Something that I have thought about actually, because the depth of field is so short on here, when you're trying to focus it to be absolutely parallax free, the actual perfect spot is quite hard to find. So I'd certainly think about putting a fishing coaster on here. I've done a video also on these little fishing coasters. I might even have one here somewhere. Can't find one, I'll put a picture up. A breakaway fishing coaster on here would just increase your leverage and make it a lot easier to get that parallax free. Interestingly, I have noticed that when I get the image absolutely crystal clear through to my eyesight, I can still induce a little bit of parallax error with sort of moving my head around a little bit. To get it absolutely parallax free, it's actually slightly off clear. Not too much that it's a problem, but just be aware of that. Again, it's probably an eyesight thing, depends on what you've got on your ocular adjustment. But for me, I have to go just past the crystal clear for that sort of range to get it fully parallax free. So probably just a quirk of the scope, maybe dependent on the magnification and your ocular adjustment, but just be aware of that. There is a good chance if you've got the image that looks perfectly clear, you may still be able to induce a tiny bit of parallax error. Which of course, for Benchrest disciplines, when you're shooting at a 2mm target, that can mean the difference between an X and a 10. So something just to be a bit aware of.
Right then, so we've owned it for a solid week already. This is the third session with it. I've done a couple of sessions already with it on the rimfire. That was quite interesting actually. I'm obviously quite new to competitive Benchrest shooting with the rimfire, so it took me a little while just to get it zeroed, make sure everything was okay. Now of course that's shooting indoors under LED light, and I did notice immediately, and certainly obviously I've got quite good experience of other scopes, there's an LED strip light up a little bit behind us, and the ocular lens on this does suffer a little bit when you've got light coming in from behind. So I did actually find that yesterday evening I was ended up shooting with my hat on just to shield the ocular a little bit. It could definitely do with something of a small pig's ear here. Now of course we're outside today. It's actually quite overcast, but it's still quite bright. Now the image quality outdoors is significantly better than it is indoors. At the higher magnification ranges, I mean this is calibrated to be run at 40 mag, so it's got a little ring around the number 40 on the magnification ring there. That's what the reticle is calibrated at, so that it fit nicely in the middle circles on your Benchrest target cards. However, at 40 magnification, the image quality does drop out quite a lot. It's certainly a lot nicer to use back at around the 35 to 36 magnification mark. Now that is a little bit frustrating because it's all calibrated to be used at 40 mag. Yet at 40 magnification, obviously it's the worst end of its sort of performance range. At 10 to 25 mag is actually really quite good, and certainly a lot better than some of the other sort of scopes of similar pricing, but of course the reticle then, or the image, is not large enough to get the best of the fine target dot that it's got. The reticle is very fine. Now that's a blessing and a curse. Because it's so fine, you can accurately place it in your target. However, if your eyesight's not the best, you are going to struggle. Now, the majority of Benchrest 25 yard, 25 metre disciplines are shot on targets that, broadly speaking, look a bit like this on paper. Because of how fine the reticle is, you've got a little floating target dot in there. If you were, for instance, Benchrest shooting at your club, maybe on metal knockdowns, sort of HFT type targets, that sort of stuff, you know, sort of the common spinners and things you're going to see at clubs, you are going to struggle to see that reticle unless it's quite well sort of lit, or if you've got a decent bit of light out there. As the magnification increases, of course, the light gathering drops significantly and the image gets a little bit darker. However, 170, 180 quid, you've got to be very mindful that it is an inexpensive scope. One thing I will say, and it's probably going to be a little bit counterintuitive, if you are shooting primarily paper targets like this, absolute optical clarity is probably not as important as the ability to get this onto a zero, for it to hold zero and to be parallax free. They're sort of more important than absolute sort of optical clarity. Of course, we're just looking at often a beige or a white piece of card. There's not a lot there. We're not generally at the longer ranges dealing with sort of heat haze. We're not dealing with mirage or anything like that, where far more expensive scopes would be better. So in its class, certainly one of the only entry-level scopes at this sort of money that has a reticle designed for Benchrest targets. Quite happy so far. I definitely don't think that it's going to hamper my beginner Benchrest shooting really. I'm sure that we could take this to a fairly high level without sort of any real problems. Maybe going forward we'll look at something a bit better, but as it stands at the moment, using it on the slightly reduced magnifications, which is also not a bad thing because of course I've got a natural wobble, we all have, we've all got a sort of pulse, everything like that. On sort of 25 to 30 mag, it's not quite as pronounced, of course, as it is at the higher magnifications. Maybe not a bad idea to start at some of the slightly lower magnifications, and as I get more proficient, maybe even if as you get more proficient, then bring the magnifications up slowly. I probably wouldn't recommend that you, certainly if you're relatively inexperienced at Benchrest, I wouldn't necessarily recommend you whack it straight up to 35.
Right, so we've had a little go outside. I want to show you the card. So this was one of the first, in fact it was the second card that I shot. We spent a little time just trying to bring it roughly onto a 0. Once I got it onto the actual card itself, after we'd made some quite large adjustments, of course taking it from its optical centre out the box, getting it onto 22LR, made a few reasonable scope adjustments in terms of the elevation, of course, just to get it where it needed to be. It certainly wanders around a little bit, and the same as the card that I've just shot, the one that you've just seen that I sort of time-lapsed outside. Again, I'd just taken it from the settings for the 22LR, which was my points of impact up here. Of course, then we had to drop it down an awful lot. Of course, what's actually happening is the reticle is coming up in the scope under a rector spring tension, and it does appear to be a little bit slow in its sort of tracking, if you like. That's probably the easiest way to explain it. I definitely would suggest that spending a little bit of time with your version of this, working out any sort of quirks in its adjustment. Now, I'm actually refilming this bit because, again, back down at the club, chatting to a couple of the lads down there that have these scopes. A few of them actually, if you wanted to, for instance, make an adjustment of 2 clicks, what they'll do is actually give it 4 or 5 clicks and then come back 3 to take out any backlash in the mechanism, and it seems to work a little bit better, but it certainly caught me out a few times. You've just seen on the time-lapse one there, I was working my way around the card just to start with, and I was actually making, to start with, a few minor clicks. Now, these are 1/8 MOA clicks on here, which are relatively fine in the grand scheme of things. There's a few scopes that have 1/10 of an MOA. Now, my brain works in milliradians, mil dots. Everything I've used has always been mil dot pretty much, so I do need to double check myself. This may not be absolutely correct. As I say, I don't work in MOA typically. One single click on here at 25 yards should move the reticle approximately 0.75, around 3/4 of a millimetre, so that's pretty fine. Certainly a lot finer than the typical scopes that I'm using, which have 1/10 of a milliradian, 1/10 of a mil dot per click. That means these are almost 3 times as fine. I think it's about 2.4 millimetres at 25 yards per click on my bigger scopes. This one should be down in the region of 0.75 mil, so certainly take a little bit of time to get used to the much finer clicks if you're used to a milliradian type scope. However, it does allow you to zero it quite accurately. Anyway, worked my way around the card. You can see I was making tiny adjustments as I got round, but it did take quite a few shots for that to settle down onto its 0 point. Once I got it there or thereabouts, I was shooting out the O's in the score on the card here. All of those shots landed well within my average group size, so I was quite happy that that's where it was, but it did take a little while just to get it there. I would definitely be a bit careful if you was on a competition card. You want to make sure that any scope adjustments are obviously done off on the sighters. It sounds very obvious, but even if you wanted to give it 1 or 2 clicks, I would definitely make sure that they're on a sighter and not on your comp card, because like I say, it is an entry-level scope. It tracks like an entry-level scope. So right, so this is one of the last cards that I'd shot with this at the club. So this was indoors, full on NSRA style, just a little front solid rest out of the shoulder. Not too bad, but I made a bit of a fatal mistake. I'd shot this, as I mentioned, out of 50 metres to start with, so I'd run out of elevation. I'd maxed this out fully to get onto the targets at 50 metres, came straight back in. I'd counted my clicks back down, and it took a little while. Of course, this wasn't a competition card, we're still messing around at the club, just getting used to it. It took me a little while to actually chase the 0 around. Now, once I did manage to get it on 0, look, that's got to be an X in it. I reckon that's probably an X. That's possibly, that one might be as well, but like I say, it shot pretty well. Now, the image quality definitely is better outdoors. When you've got more light coming into the scope, it performs better. As you can see, there's quite a lot of chromatic aberration around the outside of the scope. It's sort of fairly well fringed. The colour washes out, which, to be honest, is fairly indicative of an entry-level high magnification scope. However, back at the 35 magnification. Sort of 30 to 35 is actually quite a nice sort of middle ground to work from. So yeah, it's quite an enjoyable scope. It's certainly easy enough to use. Like I say, a few little quirks there. Once it's set, I certainly don't think it's going to hold me back in my performance. Now, of course, I'm very new to this style of shooting on the more controlled conditions. I'm, of course, used to pushing the ranges out in the wind and the weather and everything else, dealing with 2 foot of wind drift. This is a whole different ball game. Watching my pulse, especially at these higher magnifications. When you're shooting at 35 mag, you can see every little bit of pulse movement. It really highlights my poor technique. So it's given me a good idea of what I need to work on going forward. Despite this being sub 200 quid, I certainly don't think it's going to hamper my performance going forward. Right, we need to talk about the reticle quickly. This is what really sets this scope apart from the majority of entry-level ones. It's called a COM25. I've got some various pictures of it. It is a super fine target dot. So we've got a little tiny target dot, and then we've got your little reticle stadia there. Now, what sets this aside from a lot of the other scopes on the market is that it's got these little hash marks on there. Now, these are graduated and scaled, if you like, at full 40 magnification to align with the rings of your targets. Now, of course, the majority of Benchrest targets are going to look largely similar to this. Key thing is they've all got the 2mm ball in the middle. Using this at 35 to 36 magnification, of course, the actual target is marginally smaller from what I can see through the scope. These actual little stadia marks here, these little hash marks, actually overhung slightly around the outside. Now, when it was at full 40, I mean, the image quality is not brilliant when you're using it indoors. It was a lot better outside, but as I mentioned, indoors, the light gathering, especially under LED light, it did struggle a little bit. But when the image is slightly smaller, your target's slightly smaller, they overhang. It was actually easier to use with my eyesight at the slightly reduced magnifications. Now, the lower magnification, sort of 10 to 20 magnification, the image quality was actually fairly good, especially outside. It was quite crisp. There was not really too much fringing or anything like that in the image itself, so it was certainly pretty good. Of course, that's a little bit on the low side for traditional Benchrest disciplines. The depth of field and things in this is so short, you couldn't use this for hunter field target or anything really other than its intended purposes. Now, I did use it out at 50 metres on some of the different targets out there. It sort of struggled a little bit. I couldn't really get too much of a handle on it. I did manage to click it out. We ran out of elevation, as I mentioned, but certainly for the 25-yard disciplines, that's where it excels. That's basically what it's designed for. So if you want something for longer ranges, if you want something for HFT, if you want something for field target, this is definitely not it. But as an entry-level option into Benchrest disciplines, probably a really good option. One thing I did try as well was shot this at a couple of beaten up knockdown targets, like HFT type targets. Even on the larger sort of hit zone on those, when it's all a bit shot up, the ret is so fine that it got lost very, very easily. But certainly works very well in the region of 30 to 35. Now, it's quite fun for me being able to seal my heart rate and everything. It's certainly been able to highlight a lot of my poor technique. So I'm looking forward to being able to work on that going forward. But the reticle is what really sets this apart. So it's called a COM25. It's just a super fine target dot with some sort of hash marks, but that really does work very, very well for Benchrest. So, I mean, would you really put a 200 quid scope on a couple of thousand quid air rifle? If you're new to the sport, I don't actually think this would hold you back. Like I say, it's got a few quirks to it, but actually the core fundamentals of this scope will allow you to get up to a fairly high level. I definitely don't think that this is going to hold me back an awful lot. Maybe down the line we will end up swapping it for something more higher end for Benchrest, I don't know, but certainly at the moment, for the money, I think you're going to be hard pushed to beat it. It will allow you, if you're good enough, of course, to clear a card. I can't do it yet. If I do manage to get it done, we'll obviously get it on video and I'll show you how it all pans out. But yeah, not a bad little bit of kit really. I've quite looking forward to putting it back on the 22LR actually. I'm still finishing off my probation period at the club, so I've got a couple of weeks yet before I can start taking my own stuff. This isn't going back on the 22LR. I'm going to try and get a few more cards shot with that, but quite enjoyable, relatively inexpensive. One other thing that really I do quite like about this is the finish on here. It seems to look pretty nice. Under the LED lights at the club actually, it looks almost grey. Bit of a peculiar looking thing, but fairly well put together. I definitely don't think for this sort of price point you're going to go too far wrong, and it's a heck of a jump up price wise, relatively speaking, to get something that's sort of better, if you like. When you look at the things like the Cytrons and stuff, I mean, even second hand, the Cytrons are probably 3 to 4 times the price of this. This will get you going, reasonably good package. So things I would change, definitely. It'd be nice if it tracked a bit better. Definitely would like some adjustable dovetail mounts in there. Even if they added another 10-15 quid on the price, I'd like a better set of mounts that I can actually use. I'd say they're just going to go in the drawer for well, probably never get used, to be honest. But right, that'll do it for this one, guys. I'm going to get this back on the 22LR. It's quite an enjoyable scope to use, pretty well put together, not a lot of money, and I don't think that you're going to find anything that comes close to it in the market. The really key thing with this is that super fine ret. Now, if your eyesight's a little bit on the poor side, I think you may well struggle. So as with anything scope related, see if you can try one out before you buy one. I broke my golden rule. I'd not seen one of these before in the flesh. Anytime you're looking at buying a scope, see if you can try one first. Get to a shop, have a little play, have a peer through it, get down your club, see if anyone's got one. Always try these things out before you buy them. So I'll see you in the next one, guys.